The following program has been brought to you by Tiger Media Net. That program being, It Came from the DVD Collection. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. My name is John Billinger.
And I'm Connor Keating.
And we like turtles.
Yep.
We're referencing the internet meme because today's movie is Gamera, Guardian of the Universe. Before we talk about the movie, we should give a little bit of background on Gamera. Not many people know who that is because he's a little bit obscure in terms of Japanese movie monsters.
Mm-hmm.
At least to the general public. Most people, they're familiar with Godzilla, Rodan, King Ghidorah, Mothra, those guys. Especially in the last couple of years since, they've introduced them in American-made movies. But Gamera is a little bit different because I don't think there definitely has not been an American-made Gamera movie yet.
No.
Will it ever happen? I mean, fingers crossed, one day we'll get Godzilla vs. Gamera versus King Kong, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, Gamera was a Japanese monster that came out in the They first made the first movie in 1965 as Giant Monster Gamera, or Gamera the Giant Monster. It was also known here in the States as Gamera the Invincible. And they were originally, originally were not going to make a... Daiei was a studio that made the Gamera films, and originally they were not going to make turtle movie. They were supposed to make a movie about giant rats called Nezura, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there was a problem. It's a little hard to figure out what exactly happened, but basically people were concerned about disease, and so they burnt the rats, and then they restarted, and they're like, all right, let's get them up with a new idea, and then they did Gamera.
Yep. I've actually read somewhere that there's a little bit of controversy about Gamera's origins because I've read that there's this writer, Japanese screenwriter, who he claimed that a couple years before they made the first Gamera film, he pitched them the idea of a giant turtle monster movie, and the Daiei executives rejected him. And I guess he's like, they stole my idea or something like that. I don't know if that's really true or what exactly, so there's a little bit of controversy surrounding old Gamera. Anyway, in Gamera's first movie, he was a bad guy, much like Godzilla was in his movie. In fact, the Gamera films pretty much parallel with the Godzilla films. In fact, you could say Gamera is kind of a rip-off of Godzilla because they kind of made those movies to cash in on Godzilla. Yeah, I heard Gamera described by Brandon Tenold as Gamera is the RC Cola to Godzilla's Coke Classic, which is a pretty good way to compare it. Anyway, in Gamera's second film, and pretty much every film from then on, Gamera always fought another monster. And in the classic Showa Gameras of the 60s and 70s, usually there was an annoying little kid that people in the sci-fi community collectively call Kenny. Basically, this kid that's just there to interact with the monster and be very annoying.
And he's not the same kid. And usually there's multiple Kennys, and sometimes there are female Kennys.
You see,
yeah, just a broad term for the little kids that shout at the monster.
Yeah, and they always say, Gamera! 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 They always say that over and over and over again. And you're like, ugh. As a result, the classic Gamera films from the 60s and 70s don't really have a high reputation, even when compared to the Godzilla films. They don't really... they really do not get that much respect. And to be honest... I'm sorry.
Classic Gamera kind of peaks with Barugon, and then Gauss is has the best Kenny, but he's not the main focus either. So it's that's the first.
And Barugon also does not have a Kenny.
Yeah, that one just straight up does not have a kid. So those the second and the third Gamera films are kind of where the Showa series peaks, and then
those are the second and third one, by the way. And then after that, they just go downhill. And I watched the Gamera films, this classic Showa ones as a kid, and I liked them, but I was just basically this definitely is not as good as Godzilla.
They've got their fans, the later Showa films.
But anyway, so the Gamera films, they pretty much... Daiei was starting to lose money on them in the early 70s because the television industry rose up in Japan, and they stopped making the last one they made was in 1971, and then they made one more a couple years later.
The awesomest movie ever, got Gamera Super Monster,
which is basically a stock footage parade of clips from previous Gamera films.
And they also stole the Death Star from, or not Death Star, what is it called, that ship? The triangle one.
The Star Destroyer.
Star Destroyer, they stole one of those and put it in the movie.
Yeah, it's really not a good movie, dude.
No. And
and then it's also kind of a Superman ripoff because they have those
they got the weird super women. Anyways,
but then in the 90s, well, beginning in the mid 80s, the Godzilla series got the big Heisei series reboot, and we got the Heisei Godzilla films like Godzilla in 1985, Godzilla vs. Biollante, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. Mothra Battle for the Earth, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, which is not to be confused with the other two Mechagodzillas from the 70s,
or the two from the 2000s.
Yeah, it's just called Mechagodzilla 2. That's the name of the monster. Okay, yeah. But it's no relation to any other ones. And then there's Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, and there's the one that everybody loves
that I hate,
Godzilla vs. Destroyer. And that's how you say Destroyer. You gotta say it like that, okay? You can't just be like Godzilla vs. Destroyer. You have to be Destroyer.
This is why I hate this film.
Yeah. And anyway, and then when Godzilla vs. Destroyer came out, Daiei decided to reboot Gamera with Gamera Guardian of the Universe, and this film was distributed by Toho, the studio that made the Godzilla films. So, and that brings us to this film. So, what are your general thoughts on the movie? Just
This is one of the greatest monster movies of all time, and absolutely destroys all of the 90s Godzilla films because they all suck.
Yeah, he's not a big fan of the Heisei Godzillas.
Yeah, after Biollante they fall off. Anyways, so yeah, this movie's
we'll cover those at some point. We'll cover those.
This movie is awesome though. I first saw it. Gamera was always kind of elusive to me as a kid because I heard about, like, my parents told me about, oh yeah, there's this other guy called Gamera. He's a turtle and he fights Godzilla at some point, and that's not true at all.
There's never been a Godzilla. There's
never been a Godzilla vs. Gamera movie. There was like a stage show that there's like 5 crappy pictures from, and that's it. But anyways,
yep.
This Gamera has been super elusive to me. There was like one time where my dad pulled off the DVD off of a shelf at Walmart. I was like, here's Gamera, and then stuck it back on, and then we walked away. But eventually when I got onto YouTube, I found the full movies, and so yeah,
because a lot of the Showa Gameras, like the English dubs of them, were public domain, which is how I saw some of them.
But yeah,
and they were also shown in Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah, stuff like that. But this was the first Gamera movie I managed to watch though, and yeah, I was pretty blown away. And then when I got it on DVD later on, like, now it's not on my tiny phone screen.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah,
you go from tiny phone screen to big TV.
Big TV.
And you also saw this on a cinema screen, kind of.
Oh, I did. I watched this at G-Fest, but it wasn't at the big Pickwick Theater. It was it was in like the basement where they show like the fan films and like the Asylum films. So it wasn't the greatest viewing experience, but it was still cool to watch it like with fans, even though it was a fairly empty room, not as packed as the prior film of Mega Boa. But anyways,
yeah, I became aware of Gamera because of Cinemassacre. He did a top 10 giant monsters video. I think we talked about that in the Giant Claw video, and I believe Gamera ranked at number 5 in his list. I don't remember for sure.
It was like 4 or 5 because I think King Kong and Godzilla and then Giant Claw were above it.
Yeah, but and I remember the first clip he showed was a clip from Guardian of the Universe, and so that's how I became aware of Gamera. I saw the Showa films as a kid, but I've never seen any of the Heisei Gamera films. And there's also one Millennium Gamera film that was made in 2006 called Gamera the Brave. I haven't seen that either.
I've got that one.
Yeah, and apparently there's a Gamera anime.
Yep, I've seen that as well.
Never seen that.
It's on Netflix. It's okay. Lots of Kennys. But the best stuff in that's definitely the monster action. But yeah, it's one of the better crappy 3D animes that Netflix has for their monster movies, because for some reason they have the monopoly on crappy 3D anime monster movie or monster shows. But that's like the pinnacle there, and it's okay. But back to Guardian of the Universe.
But yeah, so yeah, this was the first time I've ever seen the movie, and I liked it. Mm-hmm. I'm not like crazy for
You're
it.
not
or anything.
crazy for this movie?
No, not really. I don't know. It didn't do anything that really wowed me, and I think that maybe that's because this is like the introduction to Gamera. It's like the origin story kind of thing.
Yeah.
And usually in film series, the second film is usually better than the first
A
one.
lot of people would say that the second one is kind of like the low point of Heisei Gamera. Personally, that's like my third favorite film of all time.
And that one is Rise of Legion, right?
Yeah, or Advent. Rise, Advent, Attack of Legion.
Yeah.
It goes by tons of different names. I think
was another one I read about as a kid. I also misremembered the titles of these. Like the other day when I was talking to him about it, I was talking to a friend of mine about it. I was like, yeah, I'm going to watch the part 1 of the Heisei Gamera trilogy. The first one's called Guardian of the Universe. The second one's called, I think Rise of Isis or something like that. I don't know. And then the third one's called Gamera 3, let's just call it that. But no, the second one's called
Advent of Legion, and the third one's Revenge of Iris, not ISIS.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, the Heisei Gamera trilogy is generally considered by kaiju fans to be like pretty much the peak,
like the
of
Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah, it's like this is like the peak of giant monster cinema. Maybe not like the greatest movies or the greatest monster movies of all time. Well, like as a collective trilogy, like they are really up there.
But I just thought the first one, I liked it, but I wasn't really wowed or blown away by it. But it was good. I mean, we got some good monster action. We got some good, decent human stuff in there. I think. Not as good as Godzilla -1.
Well, okay.
I guess after seeing that,
that's when people talk about characters in monster movies and then they like look back to -1. It's like, okay, -1 is like we're probably never going to get that again.
Yeah.
But most of these other movies, we at least have fun characters.
Yeah, we got some good characters.
We got a
fun police detective character.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Which we'll talk about that when we talk about the story and the acting and all that. But I liked it. Anyway, let's talk about the story of this thing. And I guess I'll let you go because you're very familiar with
I'm very familiar. So the plot of this film is basically that it starts off with the ship transporting plutonium that runs into this floating atoll. Now they manage to get to safety, but everybody's like wondering like what's this big floating rock in the sea. And so they go, one of the guys who's on the plutonium ship goes with this scientist, and they take a voyage out to it, and they find that on this weird rock is like this weird monolith, and there's all these little like comma-shaped necklace bead things, and so they're like all kind of confused, like what's going on. Same time,
English majors have striked again.
Same time, there is these attacks on this island where there are these big birds that are killing people. So this ornithologist heads out there with the police detective, and they basically discovered, no, these are not birds, they're weird bat monsters, but they're these big nocturnal creatures, and they
grow in size. Like first they're like, I think they're like slightly bigger than a human.
Yeah.
And then by the end of it, they're giant monster movie size, basically.
And so
and this is giant Japanese monster movie size.
So they're really
so
big.
it's really big.
So and then eventually So Gauss is causing a bunch of problems.
That's the name of the monsters, by the way.
Gauss, the big bird, because that's the roar they make. It's Gauss.
Gauss! And Gauss, by the way, is a returning monster
he's
from
the
the
third
old
film.
Showa Gamera movies. For some reason, Gauss is the only
he's the arch enemy.
He's the only monsters that return.
Yeah, he's the arch enemy because he appears in 3 Showa films instead of 2 like all the others. But anyways,
yeah, he's kind of like the King Ghidorah.
Yeah, he's the King Ghidorah in quotation
only
marks.
really because he's the only one that showed up multiple times.
Yeah,
and I know you mentioned that the other monsters from the old Gamera films showed up in some manga comics from the 90s.
Oh yeah, those don't count. There's a weird manga sequel after this, but anyways. So the Gals are causing problems. This team is trying to get that, and at the same time, this rock is being weird, and eventually it opens up and reveals that it's a big turtle shell.
Dwayne Johnson.
No, it's a big turtle. And so while they're trying to capture the Gauss, Gamera shows up. It causes problems, and then at the same time, around one of the scientist's daughters was given one of the commas by the guy who was on the plutonium ship originally, and then that basically gives her a psychic connection to Gamera, and so like she can like kind of understand Gamera's thoughts, kind of sort of control him, but not really. And then when he gets injured, she gets injured. I'm sure that she gives him strength somehow, but
very parasitic relationship.
Yeah. But anyways, and so Gamera. They find out is like from this Atlantean civilization. Gauss is as well. Gamera was made to kill Gauss, and so it's like this big 1,000-year-old struggle between these 2 monsters. But the Japanese government, because Gamera is bigger, targets Gamera, even though he's like the good guy, but they don't know that quite yet. And so then, because they're focusing on Gamera, that allows the Gauss to get bigger, cause more problems, eat more people. And then it ends with a big battle between Gamera and Gauss. Once they kind of figure out, okay, I think this Gamera guy might be a good guy.
And that's the story of the Odyssey by Homer. That was a very long synopsis.
I'm sorry.
I figured you'd be a lot shorter.
I'm sorry. It's a kind of a complicated film.
Yeah.
Because, there is a lot of, like, lore and stuff that's happening here, and you've got only got 2 different subplots that combine together. My Biolante one will be even longer.
We'll get to that one day.
Maybe.
God willing. Anyway, so you like the story?
Yeah,
I'm assuming you really like the story.
I dig this story, but kind of like one of my problems with the film, and it's like it's not necessarily a bad problem, but I don't know. This is a film that a lot of people might like because of this, but there's just a lot of monster stuff, and so after a while, it kind of deflates the impact of the monster scenes. Like whereas like -1, for example, has 4 distinct appearances of Godzilla, right? Beach, Sea, Ginza, and then the final battle. Here, you kind of maybe it's because you do have 2 monsters, but you've got like tons of different set pieces, and so they kind of all blend together, and after a while they just kind of they just lose their impact. But I will say that for a movie with a lot of monster action, it does not thankfully impact the characters, because that's normally what happens is too much monsters, not enough focus on characters.
I would have liked to have more focus on the monsters here.
You would have?
Yeah, I feel like we kind of stopped focus on them a little too much, and some of the scenes with the humans are a little slow. But when you do get the action, it's a lot of fun, because the monsters are pretty cool.
Yeah, the effects in this are very, very impressive. The fight scenes are very brutal. That's kind of like.
Well, let's talk more about the effects, and I guess more about the monsters as well. Because the viewing audience who has no idea what Gamera is, it's like, how would you describe Gamera?
He's a
giant turtle.
Movie. It's a giant turtle.
Yeah, but what are his abilities?
Breathes fire, I guess.
Yeah, he does breathe fire.
He's got elbow spikes in this movie that come in and out. That's pretty cool.
Yep. And there's the big one that
he's got tusks.
Yeah, he does.
And he can pull his limbs into his shell like a turtle.
Yep. And he can also fly.
Oh.
What?
Is that weird?
Well, I feel like most people, they watch it.
It's a big monster.
Well, yeah, but I think most people, when they watch it, that'd be kind of a twist, just because you wouldn't expect that happening.
Look, man, after watching Ultraman Taro and watching a giant monster get drunk and then dance, nothing phases me anymore, to be honest. But I guess for a spinning flying turtle for the average viewer is a little weird.
Yeah, he flies by like spinning his shell, and he just kind of goes up like a flying saucer, sort of thing. I mean, I don't know. I remember thinking, okay.
Yeah.
I know my sister, who when she saw Godzilla -1, she was stunned that Godzilla could breathe fire. Like, she was like, it has nuclear power? What? So I feel like she would definitely be really, like, blown away.
I think you need to get a copy of Ultraman Taro, and then you just give that to her.
She would never watch it.
Probably not. That's one of the long shows, too. But
she would never watch that. And then there's Gauss, who's kind of like a giant vampire hat, but with this kind of flat head that's kind of like
a hammer, almost.
Yeah.
And his thing is that he's got this like sonic breath that is so condensed.
It's like a laser beam.
It's a laser beam that cuts through stuff cleanly.
Yeah.
It's pretty sweet. He's a pretty cool villain. And I think one of the cool things that a lot of people also dig about the Gauss in this is that rather than being like one big monster, the Gauss in the Heisei trilogy are kind of like a bunch of smaller monsters that then get too big if you let them grow. So they kind of got like their own cool gimmick that helps separate them from a lot of other monsters.
Yeah, and this movie, unlike Godzilla -1, was suit action. It was like Suitmation, where they have a guy in a suit running around a miniature city, and the effects are really well done in this.
Really well done.
Because in the 90s and 2000s, I feel like that's when they started peaking with...
I would say that the pinnacle of Suitmation from the Godzilla and Gamera movies is probably like Tokyo SOS. But yeah, the Heisei trilogy of Gamera
there's so
films
much detail.
Are also really good. Yeah. And the later...
It really does make you sad that they don't really... Toho didn't do it.
Yeah. And the later Heisei Gamera films, the suits for these monsters get like really elaborate, and you just look at them, like Legion, you look at that and you just think, there's no way there's a guy in there. But no, there's two guys in there.
That's a horror story in itself, because being a guy in the rubber suit is like a really awful experience.
Yeah, sweaty and
hot, it's claustrophobic. It's not fun at all. And then but and then Gamera's design in this movie also reminds you a lot of kind of like a mix between his design from the first Gamera film and then the later Gamera films of the show era, where they kind of like trying to make it more appealing, more kids.
This is definitely a bit of a... Compared to the other Heisei films, this one looks a bit like nicer, and that was like a studio thing because they wanted to.
But in the later movies, he gets meaner looking.
But like the design crew wanted to have like the elbow spikes out at all times, and they wanted him to look big and tough. But the studio was like, no, make him more kid friendly. So they had to hide the elbow spikes and stuff like that. And then they gave him kind of like these big, like friendlier eyes. But then as the films went on, he
became edgier.
A lot edgier in the third film.
Gamera. Yeah. At least it's not as edgy as Gigan's design. Yeah. Wars, so it's like Gigan!
But speaking of edgy, the Gauss design is a bit edgier than its original. They're very, very gross sort of creatures.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
I really dig it. I really dig it.
It reminds me a lot of the Alien. Like the Xenomorph. Definitely a lot better than that Gauss from the first Gamera versus Gauss.
I dig that Gamera design because
as
a Showa design, it's cool.
But it's not it hasn't aged well, I don't think.
Yeah.
Then there's the acting. Let's talk about that, because we got some pretty solid acting, I think, for a Japanese monster movie.
This is I think just performances all around are solid. My favorite actor of all time, Akira Kubo, makes a 5-second appearance at the very beginning, and then that's when the film peaks.
And then we should talk about one of the actors, the police inspector.
The police inspector? I can't remember his name in the movie or the actor's name.
We'll have an editor's note here on what his name is.
But
editor's note. That actor's name is Yukijiro Otaru.
Yeah, he is. After these films, he became pretty popular in the monster movie
community.
Yeah,
he makes cameos in all the other Gamera.
Yeah, he makes a cameo in each of the other two films. He has a bit of a larger role in the third one, and then he makes a brief appearance in an episode of Ultraman Max, and he showed up recently in a lot of the smaller kaiju films. Like I think he was in the Great Buddha Arrival, and then he was also one of the main guys in Nazura 1964,
which is a movie about the making of the movie that they were going to make instead of the Gamera film back in the 1960s.
So yeah, I don't necessarily want to call him like a Dai or a modern Dai Katakawa, whatever the heck.
Contract actor.
Yeah, mainstay, but he certainly appears in a number of a lot of kaiju films nowadays. I don't think he's made an appearance in a Godzilla film, but maybe one
yet.
day.
Yet. Well, didn't the director of this movie, he went on to direct Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters, All Attack.
Yeah.
He didn't use him in that movie?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, man.
He might have. He might have a bit role in there somewhere, but so this guy he did that, and then he also did a couple episodes of Max, and I don't know if he's done much else since then with kaiju films. He might have done some indie stuff, but I'm not sure.
Now, since the director of this movie also directed Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Attack, and I will always say that is the title of that movie. It's not GMK, it's Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Attack. I will maintain that to the end of my days. How would you compare this movie to that movie?
Personally, well, I like GMK.
Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Attack.
I'm sorry. Personally, I think I prefer at least the first two Heisei Gamera films over Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack.
Good. You saved yourself a knife wound there.
Because, I don't know, that the Godzilla film is a little like, it's a bit edgy.
Edgy.
And I think the suits and the effects in that film can be a bit hit and miss, whereas the Gamera films are pretty, like, top-notch in that respect. And so, I don't know, I just kind of prefer the first two Gamera films. The third one, a lot of people really like. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it's still a really good monster movie.
All right. And I guess we'll segue into the final thoughts. What are your final thoughts on the movie?
This is one of the greatest monster movies of all time. 9 out of 10. Would recommend. I think this is like a pretty solid entry point for people who maybe want to get
into the Gamera series.
Get into the Gamera series, yeah. Like
or into other, I guess, older. Like if you were to backtrack into older Japanese monster movies, I'd say this would be a good one to start with.
Yeah, but it's like, I've seen the Monsterverse, I've seen Pacific Rim, I've seen the King Kong movies, T-1. All right, then here's Gamera, or Guardian of the Universe, as a way into this big turtle series.
That's why I'd say I'd give this movie about an 8 out of 10 myself. Because I do like it. It has some great monster action. It has a good story. It's a little slow at times, but it's a good movie.
Personally, I think it's one of the faster paced monster movies out there. I don't know, you might find Gamera 2 or 3 to be a bit slower, because they definitely slow it down a bit, but yeah.
Well, we'll check out those in the future. Well, anyway, that was it for this episode. Join us next time when we talk about something that we haven't decided upon yet. Woo! And, as a change of pace, I'll leave you with the classic 1960s and 70s Gamera theme. Enjoy! Any final goodbyes?
No.
That's all, folks. It Came from the DVD collection was hosted and produced by John Billinger and Connor Keating. The movie cover, Gamera Guardian of the Universe, is the property of Dai Company Limited. This has been a Tiger Media Net production.